I was already holding the pen when I realized the nurse was watching my hand the way a hawk watches a mouse. She had gentle eyes and a badge that said Mariana in bubble letters, and she had a job to do, but I could feel how the whole maternity ward had become a jury box. My wife, ex-wife, soon to be, if there is a God, and a county clerk, was turned to the window, hair braided, chin lifted like a queen awaiting a proclamation. The baby, sleeping, soft, innocent as the first morning of the world, made tiny chirping sounds that wrapped around my ribs and squeezed. The paper in front of me glowed bright and bureaucratic, a white flag I was being asked to raise over the ruins. "Sign here," the box insisted. "Sign here and surrender your future. Sign here and become the punchline of every cheating stories thread, a cautionary headline in Reddit betrayal diaries. A husband refuses to sign birth certificate only after he already did." Mariana softened her voice and said, "Whenever you're ready." My hand shook. The pen tapped the table. The baby sighed. And something in me, something that had been asleep for months, maybe years, woke up with a start and stood at his ground. No, it didn't come out as a speech, not yet. It came out like a heartbeat. "No." Mariana blinked. My wife turned slowly, like an actress hitting her mark. "No," she said, incredulous, as if she'd offered me a discount and I was being ungrateful. "No," I said again, clearer, louder, tasting the syllable like a bitter pill and finding it medicinal. "I'm not signing. Not today. Not ever." Somewhere down the hall, a television murmured highlights from last night's game. Somewhere nearby, a baby cried with the bright, insistent honesty of new life. My wife's mother, who had been quiet long enough to make me suspicious, popped up from her chair and started the performance she'd been rehearsing since the baby shower. "Think of the baby," she said. "Be a man," she added, with a tone that suggested I was failing a test written by people who never learned my name. I said I would think of the baby. I would think of the baby by not lying on legal documents and not shoving a stranger's paternity into my pocket like a parking ticket. She said, "Stranger?" My wife said, "Are you kidding me?" And then we were off to the races. But a strange calm had settled over me, like the still air in the center of a storm. I watched myself from a distance, saw a man in a plain gray hoodie and beat-up sneakers, saw his jaw lock and unlock, saw his eyes hold. I remembered the Amazon box tucked behind the winter coats. I remembered opening the email that said, "Results ready." I remembered the floor vibrating, like a subway passing underneath the house. And here's the part people miss in the relationship stories and family drama stories they speed through on Reddit stories. The moment you stop begging reality to be kinder than it is. The moment you finally stare down the thing in front of you and refuse to step aside. The nurse offered to give us privacy. My wife said, "Don't you dare." Her mother said, "He's ruining everything." I said, "You ruined everything when you tried to use that baby like a padlock." The room went still enough to hear the clock scratch at the wall. If this were one of those wife-cheating short story posts, the comments would say, "Lawyer up, brother, and get out." In the glare of hospital light, the words sounded less like advice and more like a map. I put the pen down. Across the room, the baby hiccuped. I felt my heart tilt, but I didn't move. I had already learned the first truth of betrayal stories. A false step today is a bill that comes due every day after. I put my hands in my pockets and found them empty. I told the nurse I needed a minute. She nodded. I told my wife there wouldn't be a signature. She laughed once, a sharp metal sound that made the bassinet shiver. "So this is how you want to play it," she said. I said, "No, this is how I refuse to be played." And because stories are rarely kind enough to proceed in an orderly line, the ending, my ending, carved into that single word, arrived before the beginning. So let me tell you how we got here, because endings without beginnings are just headlines, and I've learned those get your blood up, but don't make you smarter. Let me tell you the long American road that led me to that white sheet, that blue pen, and that brand new life blinking at a ceiling full of fluorescent stars. At first, our house looked like every other house on our block. Flag on the porch, a grill that apologized for the sins of the week with smoke and sauce, Amazon packages huddled like turtles by the door. We had the ordinary things that make up family stories in the Midwest. Mismatched mugs, a dog that ignored fetch but loved watching football, neighbors who knew how long to linger with a beer and when to go home. If you squinted, we were the stock footage used to sell patriotism and pickup trucks. Then she started getting new habits the way other people picked up seashells, a new perfume that smelled like an apology, a nail color called confession, a fitness class that met at the precise hour people avoid eye contact. It wasn't a movie montage, no slow-motion lipstick smears or dramatic close-ups of text messages winking on a bedside table. It was smaller and meaner. She kept her phone face down on the kitchen counter. She took her laptop to the bedroom with the brisk secrecy of a kid stealing cookies. She started smiling at nothing, and nothing is a crueler lover than a secret. I pretended not to see the change, because love makes cowards of us before it makes martyrs. I folded her gym clothes warm from the dryer. I set aside the dumbbells she never used. I cut up cucumbers and told myself we were getting healthy. I told myself all marriages have slow seasons. I told myself we were overdue for a weekend away. When she came home late, she brought the weather with her, bitter, the damp of someone else's rain on her hair, the gusty laughter of a borrowed joke. Our fights were amateur theater, poorly lit and full of props that didn't make sense. Why is your phone always on silent? Why are you always asking where I am? Around and around until words became ropes. We slept back to back, two islands drawing a border in the sheets. Then came the announcement, blown like confetti over a dinner we couldn't afford. Her eyes went glassy. Her smile turned to porcelain. "I'm pregnant," she said, like someone delivering lottery results. My mouth smiled back on reflex. Something else in me measured time like an accountant. The calendar flashed red. The math grimaced. I looked at her the way you look at a stranger who knows your childhood nickname. She read my face, and the table quivered under her hand. "Don't you dare," she said. I said, "Do what?" She said, "Accuse me." I said, "Of what?" We didn't speak for 3 days, just arranged ourselves around the accusation like furniture around an ugly pillar. The next weeks were a parade of ordinary miracles, the ultrasound prints that looked like topographic maps of a country I'd never visit, the tiny socks that made me ache, the crib we built with a stubborn armature of hope. Our neighbors brought over lemon bars and told us parenting would eat our time and then give it back in sticky kisses. I played along, memorizing brand names. Meanwhile, the late nights continued, the phone face-down habit calcified, and the laughter, oh, the laughter, kept coming home on her breath like a souvenir from someone else's vacation. One evening I found a receipt stuffed under the car mat. 2 drinks, a starter, a main, dessert, a second cocktail, 23% tip, and a little heart drawn next to a name that wasn't mine. It should have been a smoking gun. It was only smoke. The gun was still inside me, and I was pointing it at my future. That night I ordered a DNA test kit the way other men order power tools they don't need. It arrived in a cheerful box with graphic design that promised certainty, as if truth were a subscription you could renew annually. I hid it behind the winter coats, because winter makes good hiding places. I swabbed my cheek in the bathroom at 2 a.m. The mirror showed a man who was trying to keep his hand steady while holding a toothbrush like a violin bow. I sealed the envelope and felt like I'd mailed a grenade to myself. Life continued. Her belly swelled. I mowed the lawn. We argued about curtains. My boss told me I was distracted. The dog started sleeping under my chair like a security detail. Friends asked if we were excited. I said of course, and meant I was terrified. In my head, I drafted entries that would fit in cheating wife Reddit and infidelity stories, but I never posted. Shame is a quiet editor. The email arrived on a Wednesday when I was eating a sandwich that tasted exactly like a Wednesday. The subject line used cheerful antiseptic words. Results ready. I locked myself in a bathroom stall at work, like a teenager hiding from the principal, and opened it. Science did what it does, took my hopes and my fears and reduced them to numbers. A probability so close to zero that the zero cast a shadow. Not your child. There are sentences that change nothing and sentences that move the furniture of your soul. This one knocked down a wall and let in a wind so cold I forgot my birthday. People will tell you you go numb in moments like that. Maybe some people do. I didn't. I felt everything sharpen. The grout between the tiles, the hum of the fluorescent light, the faint smear of mustard on my wrist. I felt my life open like a trap door to a basement I'd heard rumors about. And yet I went back to my desk, finished my spreadsheet, nodded at a joke, and drove home like a citizen obeying traffic laws. That night, when she asked me to top off her water, I did it with a smile so smooth a politician would have been impressed. If this were a cheating wife story on some subreddit, readers would be screaming at me to confront her. But there's a species of dread that makes you plan instead of pounce. I watched the dates stack up like boxes in a garage. I took notes. I printed the email and tucked it inside a manila envelope with the same reverence some people give to love letters. By the time labor came, I had become a new person. Or rather, the old person had learned to stop apologizing to lies. I drove her to the hospital with both hands on the wheel, eyes on the road, mouth quiet. Her mother rode in the back like royalty, offering advice I didn't ask for, predicting that the baby would have my eyes and my stubbornness. I grunted at the appropriate intervals. When the baby arrived, the room went white and loud and holy, and for a moment I forgot my own name, let alone the web of the last 9 months. The baby is a person, I thought, and the person didn't choose any of this. I cried. She cried. The nurse smiled. The grandmother took 100 photos, all of which made me look like a man in a story he didn't write. And then the paper appeared. Sign here. I held the pen like it might bite. The conspiracy had been quiet until then, but the paper flipped the switch, and the whole thing lit up like a carnival. Suddenly, everyone had a script. Her mother leaned into the role she was born to play, the matriarch directing a family drama in which I was the understudy who'd better know his lines. Be a man, she hissed, which in her dialect meant be a wallet. Think of the baby, she repeated, retracting the clause just long enough to stroke. My wife closed her eyes and turned her face to the fluorescent heaven like a saint who expected to be canonized by dinner. The nurse, Mariana, heroic in neutrality, explained the legal facts the way a weather person explains a hurricane that has already made landfall. Signing establishes paternity. If you're married, you're presumed the father. You can challenge it later, but later is a glacier, and the baby is a clock. I heard the facts and felt the room tilt, the carnival whirling, games of chance, ring tosses where the rings were promises, barkers hawking sugar-coated lies. Step right up, sir, win a prize that isn't yours, and pay for it forever. I don't know why my mind called it a conspiracy, except that when you stand at the center of a story like this, the faces blur, and the voices merge until the whole thing behaves like a single organism with one objective: get your signature. The texts started pinging my phone like a fire drill. Friends who should have minded their business sent pastorly paragraphs about forgiveness. Her aunt, who once side-eyed me for not bringing enough side dish to Thanksgiving, turned into a legal expert via a group chat. "Real men step up," she wrote, a phrase that sounds noble until you realize it's almost always deployed to make a man step into quicksand. A cousin chimed in with a link to a blog about how family revenge never heals the soul, as if refusing to become a legal fiction constitutes vengeance. Even my own mother, who knows me down to the mole on my shoulder, said, "Honey, maybe we can figure this out later," which is what kind people say when the emergency hasn't happened to them. I had already retained a lawyer, a man with a mild voice and eyebrows that suggested he'd seen worse. He'd told me plainly that the law was a chair I could sit in or a trap I could fall through. He'd said, "Don't sign." He'd said it like a prayer, and I had taken it like sacrament. But the hospital room turned scripture into static. My wife, master of the soft focus monologue, began to cry in a way that made the ceiling feel guilty. She whispered about love like it was a blanket we could just pull over the cold facts. She said, "If you don't sign today, they'll put blank on the form, and we'll have to jump through hoops later, and our baby doesn't deserve that." I wanted to shout that the word "our" had been rented under false pretenses, but the baby hiccuped, and the world shuddered, and I became a man made of glass again. The nurse brought in a social worker, a woman with neat handwriting and eyes that had seen every chapter of the family stories shelf. She spoke about resources. She spoke about timelines. She spoke about doing what's best for the child in a tone that didn't accuse and somehow still indicted. I nodded, a bobblehead on a dashboard headed toward a cliff. In my head, I could hear that chorus from Cheating Wife Reddit, the anonymous uncles who live online and tell you to run like your shoes are on fire. But this wasn't a thread. It was a baby. It was my life. It was a hospital room that smelled like hand sanitizer and destiny. My wife finally played the card she'd tucked into her sleeve for the finale. She said his name, not the baby's, the other man's. She said it casually, like the weather. Said he wasn't ready, wasn't the father type, wasn't steady. She said it in a way that invited me to step up and erase him, make him an anecdote, let the universe return to symmetry at my expense. The audacity of it made the floor bounce. That's when the fantasy element began to creep in, the way fog creeps over a field at dusk. In my mind's eye, the door opened, and the other man walked in wearing a sash that said, "Father of the Year" in cheap glitter. He handed me a trophy shaped like a leash and said, "Here, man, I think this belongs to you." The social worker applauded in slow motion. Mariana wrote my name on the paper in loopy cursive without looking. The grandmother threw rose petals stolen from a funeral. The baby opened his eyes, and they were mine, but then they slid sideways and became mirrors, showing me not a face but a future dotted with court dates and child support, and birthdays where I brought the wrong brand of diapers and got written up on Reddit Betrayal for being late. I almost laughed. I almost screamed. Instead, I reached into my backpack, pulled out the manila envelope, and placed it on the rolling table that had held Jell-O cups and ice chips and the pen that wanted to own me. I opened it and slid out the paper with its terrible, merciful numbers. I didn't wave it like a flag. I didn't thump it like a Bible. I just put it where the light was good and said, "I know the truth." The room inhaled. The social worker blinked. Mariana's face reset to neutral with heroic effort. My wife stared at the numbers like they were coordinates to a city that had gone underwater. Her mother said, "Those tests aren't always accurate," which is a sentence that tells you more about her than any family tree could. I said, "We can do it again. We can do 10 of them. We can test the baby when the pediatrician says it's safe." But I am not signing. It should have been the end of the conversation. In sane worlds, you show evidence and the play closes. But in betrayal stories, evidence is only the beginning of the second act. The guilt machine keeps humming because lies are investments. People double down to protect their portfolio. The texts intensified, like a siren. A friend wrote, "Not signing is family revenge, and you'll regret it." I almost asked him if he'd regret assuming my life was an episode he could binge while doom-scrolling. Another friend sent a voice memo where he tried to be diplomatic and only managed to sound like a sad referee. The grandmother began itemizing the cost of diapers like a prosecutor entering exhibits. I imagined the comments under my situation if it appeared on Reddit stories. NTA. Lawyer up, save the man. And beneath that, inevitably, someone blaming me for not seeing the signs sooner. Because in cheating wife story threads there is always a Greek chorus of hindsight experts. The fantasy thickened. The walls of the room pulsed with a low hum. In the corner, the hospital TV flickered to a channel called Reddit Betrayal, where an anchor with my face reported on my life with grave urgency. Breaking news. Husband refuses to sign birth certificate as cheating wife gives birth to mixed baby. Details at 11. A crawl along the bottom of the screen scrolled family drama, relationship stories, infidelity stories, family drama stories, and the lights in the ceiling rearranged into constellations that spelled out no, no, no. The baby slept through it like a veteran of chaos. I lowered the pen to the stainless steel tray. It clicked. A tiny sound, but it shook the carnival until the lights dimmed and the barkers went hoarse. No, I said again, and the fog receded enough to see the door. If truth were a courtroom, and some days it is, then what came next felt like the closing arguments of a trial that had snuck in through the service entrance of my life. I hired the mild-voiced lawyer with the indestructible eyebrows to stand where I couldn't stand without shaking. He filed papers that had names longer than my patience. Presumption of paternity. Rebuttable. Best interests of the child. He spoke to the court the way surgeons speak to broken bones. Meanwhile, my wife's family tried to wage a PR campaign across the county. We had cousins at church muttering that I'd abandoned a child. We had an aunt starting a group chat that became a judge, jury, and publicist. We had a neighbor who waved awkwardly from his driveway like a man who'd just been told his favorite sitcom was based on a true story. The universe had become a theater where I was cast as the villain whose refusal to sign an enchanted piece of paper had cursed the kingdom. In the privacy of my living room, I rehearsed speeches about fairness and facts, but reality prefers unscripted moments. The other man finally slouched out of the shadows of rumor. He was taller than his name had suggested, with the appetites of a man who'd never planned beyond Friday night. He shook my hand like we were meeting to swap timeshares. He said, "Respect, man, for holding it down." I said, "Respect is when you shoulder what you built." And he laughed like I'd told a joke at a bar and ordered another round. In a different telling, one of those family revenge blockbusters, you'd get a cathartic punch and a slow-motion fall. In this telling, the lawyer slid a form across a table and asked him to read. He scratched his ear, squinted, and ran a thumb along the edge like he might cut himself on the words. To his credit, he didn't run. He signed, not from nobility, but from exhaustion. Sometimes accountability arrives because the alternative is too much admin. The judge was a woman with a voice that could lift boulders. She listened. She asked questions that made my bones feel seen. She said the child's interests would be protected and that truth did not harm children. That lies did. She commended restraint. I didn't think I'd shown. In that fluorescent courtroom, beneath a seal that promised justice and delivered paperwork, I exhaled the breath I'd been holding since the nurse said, "Whenever you're ready." The judge set timelines that made sense. She refused to make me a ghost father. She reminded everyone that biology is not a value judgment, but a fact that stewardship must honor, not disguise. The law, for once, behaved like a chair I could sit in. Here's where the story tilts the way you asked, from solemn to satirical, from court transcript to late-night monologue. Because once you step outside the courthouse, the world insists on being ridiculous again. A distant cousin posted a Facebook status about how men these days need to stand up, and when I didn't reply, she subtweeted me as if life were a middle school cafeteria. A local gossip page turned our saga into a meme with fonts so ugly they deserved a separate trial. On Reddit stories, a post that might as well have been ours, maybe it was ours in translation, blew up overnight. The top comment stitched together every keyword, like a rosary: revenge stories, family drama, relationship stories, cheating stories, infidelity stories, family drama stories, and concluded with a recipe for chili that, I have to admit, was excellent. In the dreamlike theater of my exhausted brain, I imagined a late-night host reading my saga into a microphone, and the audience groaning in unison, as if moral nonsense were a dad joke the culture didn't know how to stop telling. Then the conspiracy theory part of me took over, the same late-night brain that hears the ice maker and thinks intruder. What if the hospital forms were part of an ancient pact between ink and obligation, written on papyrus by a committee of men who never met a diaper? What if the pens in maternity wards were forged from reclaimed shackles, enchanted to tighten around any name written in a father's blank? What if the tax code whispered lullabies to affidavits so they'd grow up strong and hungry? I pictured a secret society of clerks in robes stitched from shredded Social Security numbers, chanting "sign here" until their voices became the ventilation system of every government building. On their altar, a gold leaf copy of the phrase "Be a Man," glowing like a cursed neon sign salvaged from a bar called Toxic. The fantasy made me laugh so hard I had to sit down, which scared the dog and annoyed the cat, and made me feel alive for the first time in months. And then, because you wanted the arc to trip honestly into the surreal, I dreamed a night court for broken vows, presided over by a judge who looked suspiciously like the cashier from the hardware store. The jury was made of baristas who'd heard it all. The bailiff was a pediatric nurse named Mariana, who shushed both liars and lawyers with the authority of a woman who has quieted 100 newborn storms. The evidence was displayed as constellations across the ceiling, receipts twinkling like distant suburbs, late-night texts blinking like radio towers, a DNA test glowing like a lighthouse that refuses to apologize for the rocks. When the verdict came, it wasn't a sentence, but a blessing, chalked on the floor like hopscotch. You're allowed to tell the truth even when it makes people uncomfortable. You're allowed to lay down the pen. You're allowed to walk away and still wish the baby nothing but every kind of mourning. Of course, I woke up to bills and laundry and a dog who needed his shot. Even in the fantasy, you do the dishes. But the texture of life had changed. Ordinary things stopped feeling like camouflage for an ambush. The coffee tasted like coffee instead of a bribe. The sky did its trick with the blues. I went for runs that actually moved me instead of making me feel like a man performing running for a surveillance camera. I met with my lawyer and didn't tremble. I told my mother I was okay, and for once, meant it. My ex and I communicated through people who know how to write down necessary sentences without adding adjectives meant to bleed. When I lay down in my too-quiet house, I didn't scroll cheating wife Reddit for confirmation that I wasn't crazy. I knew I wasn't. The quiet hurt, but it didn't lie. On a Sunday, I grilled ribs with the neighbor who fixes everything with duct tape and grace. He didn't pry. He told me his favorite baseball team would break his heart again. We ate in the generous American dusk and tried not to swat at wasps who hadn't learned the difference between sugar and desperation. He said, "You did right." I said, "I did necessary." He said that too. Between innings, I caught myself drafting the YouTube description I'd never post. A man in a Midwestern zip code becomes a headline he refuses to click. Revenge stories are often loud. Mine turned out to be a quiet refusal that sounded like a door unlocking. If there's a moral tucked into these betrayal stories, it's not that men should be harder or women should be gentler. It's that the truth, once found, is a compass. And while compasses won't save you from the weather, they will save you from walking in circles. So here we are, at the end that happened before the beginning. I stood in a hospital room and told a piece of paper it could go on without me. I watched a baby sleep and promised him silently that I would never use him to clean up the mess adults make when they mistake attention for love. I walked out into a parking lot that smelled like sunburnt rubber and cafeteria coffee. My phone buzzed with opinions that paid no rent. I put it in my pocket and listened to the cicadas gossiping about eternity. Somewhere, some algorithm was filing me. Under Reddit betrayal, family stories, relationship stories, husband refuses to sign birth certificate, cheating wife gives birth to mixed baby. But my life felt less like a tag and more like a sentence finally punctuated. On the drive home, the radio played an old song about losing and keeping and losing again, and for once I didn't change the station. When the chorus came, I sang the only word that had ever really mattered in this entire saga, the one that tasted like medicine and victory at the same time. No, then, quietly, like a new habit finding its legs, I said yes to my own name.